A very warm welcome to our evening program for Ngndro. And this evening, we're going to begin with what is called opening prayers. For some people, the word prayer is not quite the word that they aspire to. And so the word aspirations, intention, connection, whatever feels most appropriate to really begin to open our practice and really connect with the practice and also to connect with each other. For some people, the meditation sheet that has aspiration, a Shanti Deva prayer, and something else which is called request for teachings. And request for teachings is something quite classical, that someone really needs to request the teachings rather than just go around listening to someone preaching or telling them something, but there needs to be a real desire to learn. And so the one offering the teachings only wants to offer to those who would like them. So we're going to this evening begin with the aspiration, with the Shanti Deva opening of our minds, and then for the request for teachings. The aspiration is really for all of us joining together, all of our intentions for our own awakening to who we already are, to our Buddhahood. And so the aspiration, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings always be free from pain and from suffering. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings always be free from pain and suffering. And for the third time, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. And may all beings always be free from pain and suffering. And the Shanti Deva prayer is one that the Dalai Lama has embraced. For as long as space abides, as long as the world remains, just so long may I be there, resolving all beings' pain. For as long as space abides, as long as the world remains, just so long may I be there, resolving all beings' pain. And for the third time, for as long as space abides, and now for the request for teachings. Reflecting on all beings, our specific states of mind, great or lesser, will you please turn our wheel of Dharma now? Reflecting on all beings, our specific states of mind, great or lesser, will you please turn our wheel of Dharma now? And for the third time, reflecting on all beings, our specific states of mind, great or lesser, will you please turn our wheel of Dharma now. So these are classic prayers that are said before teachings. And so this evening, we're going to talk about mental training, mind training, and within the Ngndro, that is called the 4 thoughts. And so I'm going to read from the Ngndro text, the 4 thoughts to turn me from samsara. This is a very, very condensed version of the 4 thoughts. It is written by Azam Rinpoche, and it was written especially for us. It was written for Westerners and also anyone worldwide who seems to not quite have enough time to do long practices. So whomever we may be, this is something very precious from a Ngndro called Waves of Splendor, the Longchen Nyingthig Ngndro. Freedoms, rare life, lost to distraction, despite change, death, mind grasps permanence. Afflictions sway, their effects sure too, ensnare me in this suffering swirl. This is a very, very condensed approach to looking at how the mind attaches to that which is ephemeral, that which is selfless, that which causes suffering. It's a reminder. Some of us learn about suffering in different ways. Very soon in the Tibetan tradition is actually a holiday celebrating what's called the first turning of the wheel, when the Buddha walked from Bodh Gaya to Sarnath and gave the 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Was that the first talk the Buddha ever gave? Some say not. Some say, especially in the Zen tradition, that when the Buddha was first awakened, he held up a flower, but only Mahakassapa understood. So then he said, okay, I will give the 4 Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. As it turns out, Mahakassapa had a cohort, and that cohort was Bhatta Kapalini. When Mahakassapa and Bhatta Kapalini were very young, maybe 7 years old, maybe 8 years old, they ran off into a field and they started to watch how birds ate worms. And as they were watching how birds ate worms, they realized suffering at a very young age. And with that realization, both pursued enlightenment. In my own experience, having had different names as nuns in different Buddhist traditions, each of those names pointed to a different understanding. With Bhatta Kapalini, that was not one of my names. However, it was an article that I was asked to write about. And I discovered that she had become not only completely enlightened, but she had the abilities that the Buddha had, that awakening after his enlightenment of seeing into all of his past lives and also being able to see into the temperaments of the different people whom he met. And when he met different people, he had dialogues. Those dialogues were a way to awaken the mind. What we have here of the 4 thoughts that turn the mind is also a way to awaken the mind. So with Bada Kapalini, it was that she saw suffering at a very young age and understood there needed to be a way to the relief of suffering and eventually to full enlightenment. Others have come to the understanding and the turning of the mind toward the Dharma, which is what the 4 thoughts are meant to do. And there was another one of the nuns from the time of the Buddha. Bada Kapalini was a nun at the time of the Buddha. And there was another nun at the time of the Buddha, and her name was Khema Sari. Khema was a great queen. She was known to be very beautiful. And that was my namesake when I was a nun in Rangoon. And with Khema, she was very beautiful, and she was shown through the Buddha's wisdom eye of other planes of existence where there were women, men who were much more beautiful than she was. And she realized how temporal that beauty was, and her mind turned toward the Dharma. And then there was Kontala Keti, who was a Jain nun, who was also one of my namesakes. And she was very forthright. She lived independently, and she would put an apple branch into the dirt and call upon any wandering mendicant to debate with her. And she would debate wisdom. And then she had someone that she called over to debate, and that person won the debate. And usually she did. And that person was the chief disciple of the Buddha, Shariputra. And so she was very humble and said, "You won this debate. Who is your teacher?" And he said, "Come with me." So he took her to meet the Buddha. In her case, the understanding of suffering had to do with there was more wisdom to be learned. So the 4 thoughts point to the understanding of suffering, the understanding of impermanence. A lot of times that's the way that we learn. Other times it's through dissatisfaction. Nothing quite does it. Another experience that I had was very early on, before traveling to India, before being introduced to Buddhism. I lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I went to a poetry reading by Anais Nin, a very lovely woman. She was French, and I was interested to hear her. And this was in a very large church within Harvard Square, and many people came to see her. So she was reading her poetry. She was also talking. These were very turbulent times. I believe maybe the year was maybe 1970. And you could hear a pin drop until she made a statement. And the statement was, in order for there to be women's liberation, each woman needed to be liberated. And then at that moment, people in the front row started yelling at her. And then people in the rafters started yelling at the people in the front row. And the people in the front row were yelling something about a more collective point of view. And it was during the Vietnam War, and they said, "Oh, what about our sisters in Vietnam?" And suddenly the entire church, which was at that moment a poetry reading, erupted. And so she stopped speaking. And at that point, I just had this very strong realization, which I already knew I was going to travel to India. And I just said to myself, I'm leaving. And so that was a very strong turning point for me when I saw that so many different points of view, and yet we weren't getting anywhere. So all of us have had moments in time where we just need to turn our attention into our own center and find out what more we can know within ourselves. So the four thoughts that turn the mind from samsara. So samsara is that confusion. It's that confusion that I saw in the church that evening. It's the confusion that comes in our minds when we can't quite figure out what's happening. It's also called delusion, where we cannot quite see clearly. Freedom's rare life, lost to distraction, despite change, death, mind grasp permanence, afflictions sway, their effects sure too, ensnare me in this suffering swirl. So how does this really apply in our lives? How do we use it? How is it applicable? It turns our attention to the Dharma, yes. How do we use it every day? The other day, I heard the Dalai Lama say that he wakes up and points to himself and says, "Where am I?" And does a self-reflection on, who am I? Very similar to a Zen koan, very similar to an analytical review of who we are. In my own case, I wake up to a song and I reflect on the song. And it changes. And I set my phone to different songs. And one of the important things in the four thoughts is not just that there is suffering, but that we have this precious human birth. And with the precious human birth, that not only can we understand, we all understand impermanence, but that we experience, and then we do something else, something far greater than understanding, far greater than experiencing, we realize. And that point of realizing is really the point of practice. So when I wake up in the morning, I listen to my song, and this morning it was, I hear a symphony. And so then I reflect on this song, I hear a symphony, and I think of all of the factors in my life and all of the blessings that come with being in a safe place, being receptive to hearing the Dharma, that we have our Buddhist teachings available, that there is time to practice, there is the ability to practice, and there are teachers available to teach us. And that is the real symphony. All of us in the morning can do this, whether it's classic freedoms, rare life, lost to distraction, despite change, death, mind grasps impermanence, afflictions sway, their effects sure to ensnare me in the suffering swirl, to have our minds turn toward the Dharma, or we recognize the preciousness of human birth, what we do have, the capabilities, the advantages, and that we do take advantage of what we have. So when we take advantage of what we have, we've taken a huge step. We're not taken in by the suffering swirl. We're not grasping permanence. And we're not being distracted. This is what could happen, but it doesn't have to happen. In this day, we've heard about plasticity of mind. And so all of this comes under the category of mind training. And mind training is a very important part of Buddhist practice. It's a very important part of Ngndro. When we do what we opened with, our prayers, our prayers are also mind training. So mind training is that plasticity of mind where we reflect, we contemplate, and then we realize. So we understand, we experience, and we take that step to realize. Realize means it's part of our whole mind-body system. Dalai Lama talks about utilizing the mind to train the heart. So we talk about our capacity for compassion, our capacity for loving kindness, our capacity for equanimity, our capacity for joy. And I want to add with joy is sympathetic joy. Sometimes we think, well, not having too much joy. However, there is something called empathy, and it's part of sympathetic joy where we can feel joy for another. Maybe we're not experiencing something that we think is quite wonderful, but somebody else is. And sympathetic joy can bring that same kind of joy into our own mind. So our compassion, our loving kindness, our equanimity, our sympathetic joy can dovetail into the four thoughts because the four thoughts can turn our attention to those good qualities. And those good qualities are the Buddha qualities, and it's what we're looking to open up to. So when we did our aspirations, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. The causes of happiness is the development of that bodhicitta, the awakening of the heart. And what is the basis for the awakening of the heart? It is our extraordinary ethics. So sometimes we think, oh, ethics, it seems a little dull, but actually the clarity of honesty is extraordinary. And the selflessness of non-harm feels so good, feels so safe. And that safety is what we provide to other people. Sometimes we think, well, I don't know if I'm compassionate, but if you're honest and non-harming, then you're providing safety. And in this day and age, safety is so important. So we have our ethics, we have our loving kindness, we have our aspirations, and these all come together when we work with the four thoughts that turn our mind from samsara. In our next phase, which we'll only momentarily introduce, is that after the mind is turned toward the Dharma, when we've looked at maybe what we don't want, and then we start to turn to what we do want, that is profound. I'm going to read you the next part of our Ngndro and talk a little bit more about it in our next session. So after our mind is turned toward the Dharma, then the path begins. Then the excitement begins. Swift soul refuge, most loving Lama, transform these minds, my most kind Lama. Rare mortal base, take on real meaning. May I guard pure ethics and leave this swirl. This is the next step. When we've looked at how we can get caught up in everyday things, grasping permanence when we know there's impermanence, getting lost in distraction, but then turning the mind to the Dharma, taking those little hints from the three enlightened nuns at the time of the Buddha, Khemasari, Varakapalini, Kontalaketi, all who turned their minds to the Dharma, who learned directly from the Buddha. And we too now are learning the Buddha Dharma. And our soul refuge begins with a very great patron saint called Padmasambhava. In our next session, we'll address Padmasambhava, but for now, knowing that there is a refuge, there is a resource, there are just not only layers, but there are, they call it 8,400,000 teachings. When it talks about our own temperaments, our own minds, we're all very different, but there's teachings for all of them. Some of them are described in different transmissions that are received from Buddhist lamas, Rinpoches, teachers. Some are very basic, and we can pick up a book like the Abhidharma, which is the Buddhist psychology, and we can start to read through and go, oh, my mind does that. Oh, my mind does this. Or we receive what is called the blessings. And this Ngndro is the receptivity to waves of splendor, is creating the connection to Padmasambhava and all of those thousands of teachings, known and unknown, hidden and revealed, that we can take advantage of. And all of these teachings open up our own Buddha natures, open up our own wisdom, compassion, open our minds, open our hearts, till there is only one, that one wisdom, that one awareness, that one blessing. Thank you. So we'll complete this evening, taking a moment and then sharing our merit. And we'll just take a moment to think, to reflect on the four thoughts: freedoms, rare life, lost to distraction, despite change, death, mind grasp permanence, afflictions sway, their effects sure to ensnare me in this suffering swirl. Swift soul refuge, most loving Lama, transform these minds, my most kind Lama. Rare mortal base, take on real meaning. May I guard pure ethics and leave this swirl. So we'll do our sharing of merit and then we'll take questions.
Would you like me to read the sharing of merit, Jacqueline?
That would be wonderful.
Excellent. By this good, may I swiftly once become a great guru, leading all beings, every one, to reach to that very ground.